Rolling speed.
Hi, my name is Manu, and welcome to Humble Stature. This is my first interview with my good friend Bhante Varrapanyo, and he is a meditation teacher, spiritual master, maverick, and just an amazing guy all around. And so today we're going to kind of talk about our own views about Buddhism and spirituality, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you for being here, Bhante.
Okay, thank you for having me.
So I thought we kind of just start off a little bit with your background and how you originally kind of maybe just discovered Buddhism.
Well, I came across Buddhism through a friendship with actually a yoga instructor, and she introduced me to a book called Hardcore Zen by Brad Warner, and this was maybe 10 years ago or so. And from then on, I just had a connection to Buddhism and uh, got more and more into meditation and tried out different spiritual traditions like Hinduism and the Native American church, psychedelics and things like that. And eventually that led me to um, coming back to Buddhism. And I lived at a Zen center, a Zen meditation center for a year in 2014. And then in 2018, I moved to Thailand to ordain, become a monk.
That's pretty funny because I think Hardcore Zen was one of the first books that really influenced me too. Because I was really into the whole Gothic scene at the time, and I don't know, he's more punk rock, but it was like somebody who was, I don't know, just not just cookie cutter in a way, talking about his life and you know his journey with Zen. So I don't know. It's funny because we're, I think, roughly the same age. I think, well, I don't know if I'm older or you're older.
How old are you?
I'm 32.
Okay, I'm 28. I just turned 28.
Okay, so I'm a little bit older than you. And yeah, it was cool because we met in Myanmar, and I had just ordained as a samanera, and you were kind of coming after being a monk for a little while in Thailand.
Yeah.
And there's not many Westerners who are willing to fly halfway across the world to ordain, you
Sure.
know. What do you think kind of like led up to your ability to have so much conviction? Like, hey, I'm going to travel. I'm going to give up everything. I'm going to go become a monk.
Lots of suffering, lots of confusion and not knowing how to take care of myself, not knowing how to take care of relationships with people that I cared about. And so that really brought me to Buddhism and to meditation.
Mhm.
And eventually that led me to um, giving up my material success I was living in Seattle and had a great job at a construction company and relationships and all that, and um, it just wasn't fulfilling for me in becoming more and more peaceful, and that's what I was mainly focused on. So I gave it up and kind of tried to do the monk kind of lifestyle on my own, and I found that that wasn't really possible. That wasn't really a workable way to live that way aesthetically, and it led me to move to Thailand and try it out, and it's worked out, but results may vary. There's a lot of diversity in becoming a monk and what that life is going to be like for different people. So it's worked out for me, and what led to that conviction was just the first noble truth. There is suffering and an awareness of that,
Mhm.
the connection to that.
One thing people always ask me is like, how do I become a monk if I want to become a monk? And I think, for me, I had like connections with the Sri Lankan Sangha and knew people through that. And that's how I kind of, ended up ordaining, but they almost never ordain Westerners. And I even know like in Thailand now, it's quite difficult. How did you work that out? Or even choose which monastery? Because that's another really big thing is which, tradition do you ordain in?
Well, I had been speaking to some monks online, and eventually that led me to uh, moving to Thailand and visiting some of those monks that I had spoke to, Thai monks, and interviewing with them at their temples once I got to Thailand. And from making those relationships with those monks, they supported me to ordain and to go through the process. And technically, once you ordain as a monk, it depends on you how far you want to take it or how committed you want to be. Once you go through that process, that's just becoming a monk is just the beginning. That's just the walking through the door, and how you utilize that to deepen your understanding is, for each individual person, that's going to vary.
Hmm. I mean, I'm curious because I kind of have my own take. Because since I think both of us we went not only in Thailand but in Myanmar. Hey, did you go to Sri Lanka?
I've never been to Sri Lanka.
No. So, I was curious, like, what is kind of like your, people that are usually Westerners that are only here, I think they always think of Buddhism as just being meditation pretty much. But it's kind of funny because when you go over the East, you realize Buddhism mostly means praying a lot of times, or chanting
Mm.
is what most of the monks do. And I was just kind of curious, like, how maybe your view of meditation and spirituality, how that kind of um, shifted when you kind of actually got over there.
Well, for me, I had a foundation of Buddhism and meditation from a secular perspective before I moved to Thailand, and I imagined at the time that Buddhist monks were basically monks. And I didn't know so much about the diversity and the different traditions and the cultural aspects of it. I didn't know anything about it, but I very quickly learned that Buddhism in Southeast Asia is very much so a cultural tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and the monks fulfill a cultural role uh, even more so than a focus on meditation. At many times, for Buddhist monks in Southeast Asia, they are preachers, they're pastors, they're community counselors, and so that's what a lot of their training and that's a lot of the temples emphasize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so why'd you end up leaving Thailand and going to Myanmar at the time?
A lot of language barriers, and I tried a few different temples in Thailand, and also visa difficulties, having to go over to Laos and come back to Thailand. And eventually I heard about the Tabarwa Center and some of the temples in Myanmar, so I was very curious and took a flight out of Bangkok to Yangon, Myanmar.
Yeah. And so we met at the Tabarwa Center in Myanmar in Thanlyin. And I guess, I'm curious. So I guess leave it to you to kind of explain what is Tabarwa, because it's definitely, something it's not, can be quite strange, especially if you're used to a traditional temple where either whether there's chanting or everything. But obviously Tabarwa is kind of its own thing. So how would you kind of describe it?
Like Mother Teresa style center.
A Buddhist.
Yeah, Buddhist Mother Teresa style center, refugee camp. If 100 people from the U.S. flew over to Myanmar right now, they could stay indefinitely at Tabarwa Center in Myanmar. So it's a very radical place, and there's thousands of people there living at the center, and homeless people, mentally ill people. There's all kinds of things going on there. It's a very interesting place.
Hmm. Yeah, because I ended up going there because I had a random Facebook acquaintance,
Mm.
and I was in Thailand, and basically they told me that what was it? He told me I told him that I wanted to visit Myanmar, and so they texted me because I was doing summaries of the different suttas in the Nikaya, and having no idea what it was, he invited me there, and on the first day I pull up, and there's just like I mean I expected it to be kind of like Thailand, but really it was a lot more rural and a lot more poor. But I mean, it took quite a while to realize that this is a place where he's actually actively trying to help homeless people, actively trying to help people with mental disabilities. And this is something usually monks are just in their own temple and meditating and chanting and studying, and it's like, Yeah, I was so kind of amazed almost at the amount. It almost like kind of felt like to me like someone that really put their money where their mouth was. Was that kind of your experience?
Well, it wasn't my experience, but I found Tabarwa to be very interesting and a place that maybe has more diversity of activities and people than many other places in the world. Certainly, any other spiritual centers in the world.
Yeah, and like the head teacher there is named Siedo Otamasara, the head monk, and he became a monk when he was about 30, 32, I believe, after being a businessman. And so he was able to really kind of build all these centers. And one of the things we both did is we went on these crazy adventures with him,
Mm.
where we travel without sleep. A lot of times, and just we try to basically sleep in the car if you could, but it would go from one village to another village. Some of them, hadn't even ever seen like a Westerner really. I remember when I was walking through, this one guy grabbed my arm because he was so surprised that I had hair on my arms
Mm.
and started basically petting me, which was a little bit weird. But you know, what was uh, what was your experience of those kind of road trips?
Well, a lot of adversity, a lot of difficulty, and being able to bring resiliency and calmness to the storm, to confusion and difficulty. So I found them very rewarding, but very difficult
Hmm.
to travel in that kind of way.
Yeah, because after one of those week-long trips, we went all the way to is it Tachi Lake? Can't remember now. But yeah, basically over there, I got so sick I couldn't even drive back, so I ended up flying um, from there back to Yangon, and that's when I first actually had a conversation with Theodore Tamasara, and that kind of began, I know, our relationship. Um, what has it been like for you? I mean, have you kind of had like private discussions with him, and what have you kind of like been able to take away from his teaching?
Well, to do good deeds without expectation and to practice tolerance and compassion in any situation at any time. And yeah, that's the main teaching, and it can seem very simple, but also very profound for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, and then also too, I think when I kept traveling with Cito, you also spent some time in India as well for Vasa, which is like the rains period, which is I guess a 3 or 4 month period where you're basically as a monk usually not supposed to travel. And how is being in India as a monk?
Well, there's not many Buddhist people in India, but it is a burgeoning, a growing situation with people learning about Buddhism and Buddhist temples and Indian Buddhist Sangha. Buddhism is one of the ways that Indian people, Hindu people, can leave the caste system, which is kind of a system of racism, and they can become Buddhist and leave the Hindu caste system. So that's really wonderful. There's a lot of nonprofit work or wealth redistribution going on in India on behalf of the Buddhist Sangha. You have large centers from Vietnam and other countries where they offer housing and food and education to the local Indian people around some of the Buddhist holy sites
Hmm.
in India. So very, very unique and interesting experience. India is a one of a kind place in the world, I'd say, and certainly look forward to going back in the future.
Yeah, and I think also too we have like a Bodh Gaya there, which is kind of where the one of the main Buddhist holy sites where apparently the Buddha became enlightened under the Bodhi tree. And yeah, I went to India, but I just went to Chennai for like a week or two, and that was before I ended up ordaining as a monk for that period of time. Um, What would you say is the kind of the most challenging thing about being a monk?
Can be loneliness, can be isolation. Um,
Why is it lonely?
well, as a monk, you are separate from the normal society, and it can feel difficult to maintain relationships with people who are not as primarily focused on Buddhism and meditation as you are. And there's also the role of a monk to be a teacher or a supporter of people, to help people, and to put aside some of the more selfish inclinations of judgment and self-protection and all this. So that can naturally be a bit isolating. But in Buddhism, we understand that living alone can be good. So taking a retreat, solitary retreat, can be very rewarding, a rich experience. So that loneliness is also a benefit of being a monk.
I know a lot of people don't really know how to interact with monks. I'm just kind of curious. What do you think I mean, especially as Westerners, for the Western audience that doesn't know how to interact with a monk, what's the protocol?
Well, there's no protocol. It just depends on the individual person and how they want to relate to the monk. If you see a monk in the grocery store and you're a Thai person, you're probably going to bow to them, especially if it's unexpected. But if you're a person that just moved to the U.S. from Canada and doesn't know anything about Buddhism, um, it's just someone in a fancy dress. It doesn't mean anything. So if you want to interact with a monk, you can say hello, um, be kind. That's what I hope for when people interact with me.
Hmm. And then the other kind of, as a monk, one of the major changes in lifestyle, obviously, is for the most part, monks beg for their food, right? They're supposed to go out what we call alms every day, usually, and retrieve food. Um, and I was kind of curious on your take about alms because, obviously within the different monastic um, lineages, you have kind of people have like different takes and they treat it quite differently. Some of them now, all of the food is brought to the temple. Very few people actually go out on pindapata where you're actually begging with your bowl. And I just wanted to kind of see maybe your own kind of views on that of what do you think the Buddha taught and what do you kind of think? Is it okay? You think that the food just comes to the temple? Do you think it's, you know,
Well, the primary practice of a Buddhist monk, and this is something that's very foreign to Western society and Western people, is that we are, and this goes back to the time of the Buddha with alms round, but we are homeless. Buddhist monks are homeless, and they are referred to as home leavers. Um, so any Buddhist monk worth his salt, a good Buddhist monk, we could say, is recognizes that their basic situation is that of a homeless person. And so, as monks, we are trading our focus on establishing material wealth for developing spiritual wealth. And from that understanding, lay people support us materially to continue doing that work
mhm,
if they feel that it's worthwhile. And in Southeast Asia, that's very cultural. But for you know a modern monk or modern Buddhist centers in the West, you're usually selling something. You're selling a meditation retreat or a place to stay, or like in San Francisco Zen Center, I believe they have hot tubs there, like really nice places like that. So there's kind of an exchange for material.
mhm.
But traditionally, monks, we live on the donations, the support, as unsolicited as possible from the wider community, people who are not monastics.
Which we call dana, right?
Yeah, generosity, practice of generosity.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's been, I think, one of the hardest, or one of the things that I think doesn't translate very well a lot of times in the Western culture. And I know like there's almost all of the Buddhist monks that are supported are all supported by the um, some sort of either the Sri Lankan, culture or the Sri Lankan people that live in this area or the Thai people or whatever, but you don't really have a purely Western Sangha. Partly because, I mean, the tradition of Buddhism obviously is that it should be passed down from a lineage as part of it. But other than maybe a few examples, I think a lot of it is quite difficult in the West because people don't really understand about supporting spiritual seekers. That's a big part of it. Because I mean, for me, you have all these people that are trying to pursue some sort of way to make more money, become more effective, more productive, right? And then, but as far as like kind of understanding the spiritual dynamic of why you would renounce everything and go become a monk and practice, I think is really something that Westerners have a hard time grasping. I don't know if you can maybe answer like, what is it that kind of monks offer people because that seems to be something that I think like Westerners especially, it's like, okay, I get the teaching, but they don't understand like why they would want to support like in the way of understanding dana.
Well, that's up to each person, but working on our own compassion and peace and sharing that with others is certainly something worthy of supporting in my mind.
Like, why should someone support a monk?
Well, I wouldn't say that they should, but they can. The opportunity is there. And if they want to get involved with that, one way to understand it is um, if you are working with someone and you like their teachings and you like what they're doing, especially if they're a Buddhist monk, what are they going to eat?
Hmm.
Where are they going to sleep? So we support them.
Hmm.
And as Buddhist monks become successful in supporting other people and helping other people, that support grows, and then they're able to start their own temple and their own tradition, even if they're very successful with their teaching.
Yeah. And the thing that I think both of us are doing now is trying to get into YouTube and trying to really spread our message through social media and every other way we kind of can. Um, and so, as one of the main questions I kind of wanted to ask you is, what do you feel like is your kind of main message? What is it that you want to communicate to people and teach?
Well, it's an invitation. My activities, my online work is always an invitation, or primarily an invitation to practice within community. And the emphasis is on intimacy, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, this kind of intimate spiritual practice together is really important. So most of my events that I host are live, and then some videos on, posture or general ideas of meditation practice and things like that. More produced videos, but those are pretty uncommon. It's mainly live sessions that are there to invite people into intimacy and practice.
Do you eventually plan on kind of writing as well too and stuff, or is it kind of for you all about just um, doing videos? Because that's one thing I kind of started doing is kind of maybe writing articles and then trying to make a video about it. I mean, I guess you're still kind of new to this as well, so maybe we're both kind of growing together. But
Yeah.
yeah.
For me, it's mainly the live work and hosting meditation sessions. That's what I'm primarily focused on. Uh, Maybe at some point that'll be have writing involved. I write to people that I work with. People that are asking for advice or asking questions in my community. Then I write to respond to them. But the main focus is on live events where we're coming together and practicing meditation.
Mm.
And I think that's all the more important or relevant now with COVID-19 and with the restrictions on coming together physically.
Hmm. Yeah, I know it's been really tough for a lot of people. I mean, I don't know how people really mentally are able to survive with out having some sort of spiritual practice because I feel like so much of my own, you know, like so my practice has helped me so much in order to feel like I can just, you know, be happy. If I didn't have a spiritual practice to work through my emotions and anger or frustration with things, I really don't know where I would be. And so Sometimes I always feel such a strong urge because of that to try to share whatever I know and whatever can help give more of a greater spiritual context to things for people.
Mm.
Um, so I guess I was also curious. So now you're back in LA with me, a Dhamma brother. And, you know, the thing is, I noticed in Asia, it's quite easy to keep, a lot of the precepts. And I guess we should first kind of maybe just go over what are the precepts of a monk, or kind of like monks supposed to have kind of these rules they follow, or that's how it's kind of normally talked about. So I was just curious to kind of get your take on like what are the precepts and the rules, maybe actually like what they are, but then also like how do you think about them?
Yeah, precepts are guidelines for mindful living. That's what precepts are. Especially when you're living in intentional community, you need a lot of guidelines to contain that practice and that community. And so that's what the precepts are. They're ways to embody sila, to embody our morality. And for a layperson or for someone who's just generally into Buddhism, it's not important what the precepts of a monk are. It's important to establish a proper valuation for ethical living, for skillful living, being kind, um, not overindulging in anger, greed, delusion, etc., negative thinking.
Yeah, because you see like a pretty among the different Buddhist sanghas, obviously, they really take the precepts quite differently. Some of them, you know, how to say, like some of them are just by the book, everything you have to do this time, and they have it all laid out, and it's even mixed a lot of times. A lot of the cultural stuff when you try to look back, like, okay, well, why? I remember one time I was walking down the street wearing a hat, and this was in Sri Lanka, and I had a couple lay people come up to me and be like, "How dare you wear a hat?" Which there's nothing about hats, from what I can tell, in the scriptures, and stuff like that. And so I was just kind of curious on, you know, I guess even the different traditions, like first of all, like kind of maybe how you see the precepts of how strict or how, do you believe in like kind of obeying the letter? Because I've talked to monks that believe that they're kind of absolutes versus them being like you were saying, maybe more just general guidelines for behavior. I mean, or there's maybe a middle ground as well. Well, what do you think?
Most important is living ethically, practicing loving kindness, patience, generosity, forgiveness. That's what's most important.
Hmm.
Um, and the precepts, at their best, are containers for developing loving kindness, for developing tolerance, perseverance, forgiveness, etc.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because I know even like even for the basics ones, like especially like when it comes to one of them is like no, you're not supposed to have any meals after noon, and some of a lot of I've met a number of monks that maybe do eat afternoon, some of them don't, but I always kind of found it like you're kind of saying it's mostly about whether health and also a bit of more how are they practicing is really the most important thing rather than that. But it always seems like a lot of these really more superficial things seem to get a lot of attention, which I guess always kind of bothered me a bit because I think that it's always been a lot of also making mistakes and discovering. Because I remember when I was also a monk, I mean, I think I definitely broke a number of precepts, and as a samanera too, you kind of reset and take them again whenever you do something. But I always felt like also too like making mistakes was something that was never really kind of understood as you're trying to learn versus just being like a strict sort of like these are the rules, follow them or else, you know.
Well, if I had to choose between not eating after noon every day for the rest of my life or eating after noon every day for the rest of my life and also being loving and kind, and with the previous one not being loving and kind, surely I'll choose the one that includes being loving and kind. That's what's most important.
Hmm.
Uh, And for, people who are interested in Buddhism or monks from an outsider's perspective, uh, whether or not a monk is eating afternoon or not is not so important.
Mhm.
And if we're focusing on that rather than our own mindfulness, our own greed, hatred, and delusion, then we're getting off track, or we're not going to be able to enjoy the richness of Buddhism.
Mhm. So, philosophically, I'm kind of curious, kind of getting into maybe more, well, I guess more the philosophical side of things. Um, what is meditation? How would you define meditation?
Uh, Meditation is a place of training ourselves in relaxation and concentration. So following the breath, relaxing, concentrating, embracing ourselves, embracing the life that we happen to be living at this moment.
And then, how does that relate to enlightenment or trying to, what is enlightenment, I guess, first, and then how does meditation and enlightenment kind of play together?
Well, enlightenment's not so important. What's more important is to practice meditation, to focus on morality, ethical living. Uh, the experience or the realization of enlightenment, of course, is at the core of Buddhism, but that's not what the idea of enlightenment is. Talking about enlightenment, I want to be enlightened, I want this, I want that. This is just desire, this is just craving. Enlightenment is the cessation of suffering,
Hmm.
the ending of craving. Uh, so we can't think our way to enlightenment.
And so, since we're not thinking our way there, what are we doing in meditation that allows us to free ourselves exactly? Like, because a lot of people, I think there's so many meditations in LA and meditation teachers would teach a number of different types of breath work. They teach what else? I mean, there's a million and one meditation techniques. Most of them based around some form of relaxation or trying to just get to some positive mental state. But I always kind of felt like in Buddhism, especially this overarching idea of letting go of craving, detachment, it's really usually kind of left out. I think even the idea of detachment from a Buddhist perspective has been something that's really a difficult concept to grasp. So, in light of that, I guess, how does detachment and, how do you practice in order to cultivate detachment? And why would you ever want to cultivate detachment?
Well, in meditation, we're learning to let go and to see what's happening at this moment.
And just to play the devil's advocate, what does that give me?
Nothing.
So, why should I do it?
Well, you shouldn't, but you can. It's accessible, and it's up to you if you want to do it or not. But saying that you should or shouldn't do it is irrelevant. It's up to you to do it. And one of the reasons that people don't get into meditation and don't make it a regular practice is simply because we're learning to let go, and most people want to hang on.
Hmm.
So if you're doing something and it's taking your hands off the steering wheel, uh, it's going to be difficult to get into the habit of letting your hands off the steering wheel.
Hmm.
But it's very practical. So if you want to practice meditation, you should do it. And if you don't, well, then that's up to you.
Yeah. Well, I think even like I was saying before, with people mostly having a very materialistic paradigm that, when it's all about success of some type, becoming more efficient at this and that, I've always think that that's always one of the big gaps with people. It's like this. I mean, the way that I think about it is that through basically, the outside world is always subject to change. And anytime your happiness is based on the outside world, you're gonna inevitably suffer. If you want your car, you want certain things, your relationship to be a certain way, you want a certain amount of money. Even if you get that amount of money, usually you want more, or the craving just moves to somewhere else. So fundamentally, this you know, this issue of craving makes it impossible to ever be happy. And and so most people are kind of always chasing after something to try to, basically something that they think will make them happy. It's not possible it's not possible for it to fulfill that within them. And so, I mean, that's kind of the way I explain it. I don't know if you have any kind of comment on that.
No, not particularly.
Yeah. I mean, with the thing of craving, I think a lot of it's like very subtle, and I think it gets confused a lot of times with just people trying to survive as well. Where they think that if they're trying to do it without craving, they wouldn't wake up in the morning, they wouldn't take care of XYZ person. They just become this sort of potato on a couch, and they would be happy, but everything else around in their life would just fall apart. Um, but I've always found that it's kind of the opposite. That usually it's just like your actions start aligning with these higher values. Because when you usually talk to people about, especially when it comes to death, I feel like that's another really thing people don't contemplate all that much. And in Buddhism, it's quite embraced. Um, I don't know if did you ever how would you say, like, how you think about death as a monk?
How would I think about death as a monk?
Hmm.
Change. Change is always happening, moment to moment. Birth and death, change is happening. So we have an idea of ourselves and our reality, but that idea is that of just a monkey on a rock. It's not all that profound. Uh, Outside of that, for that monkey, of course, it's quite profound. So birth and death for me is change, and of course, this body, this monkey, is going to die, just like cats and dogs and lizards and uh, flowers and roses wilt. It's not something that's foreign to us. So having an awareness of death or change is quite liberating.
And then how does with death also, because in Buddhism obviously we have this concept of rebirth and many lives. Is that something that you also believe in, or do you think it's kind of
Well, the Buddha talks about this in the Angulimala Sutta, which is, of course, extremely famous. The serial killer who became a monk. And at one time, the Buddha said to Angulimala, uh, go to this person's house. This person was suffering, and they were worried about their birth, something along those lines. And he said to Angulimala, go to this person's house and tell them that by the power of your vow and your experience that you have never killed any being, you wish that their birth will be painless. They will go through the birthing process painlessly. And Angulimala, who of course used to be a very successful serial killer, went to the Buddha and said, what are you talking about, man? Um, I've been killing tons of people. I can't go and say that. And he says, well, no, you've been reborn as an arhat. So you haven't killed anything since that. So that's why you can say it. So birth and death in a very moment to moment change of human experience of we're born as an animal where we're acting only on impulse for sexual desire or for the desire to sleep or eat. We're born as a god where we have lots of wealth and pleasure and authority, or we're born as a hungry ghost who has an endlessly arising appetite and desire, a stomach that's just massive, but a tiny little mouth that cannot consume, cannot satisfy their hunger. So this is the way that I think about birth and death, these kinds of things.
hmm. Yeah, I was always kind of, I mean, since I was born in a Hindu ashram, I feel like the idea of birth and death and reincarnation was always such a given to me, and that yeah, that it was always kind of hard for me to ever explain that because I felt like it was always, even all the experiences I've had. I don't know if you've had any past life, remember anything that you thought was from a past life. I know I have. Have you had anything like that?
No,
No.
I haven't done it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So kind of maybe kind of changing the topic again, I was curious to talk, guess something about maybe a little more controversial, which is like the drugs. What you said in the beginning you did what did you was it mushrooms or other stuff like that when you were before you became a monk?
I've taken drugs before, sure.
And but it seemed to have somehow aided, or would you say that it aided in your understanding of the world or during that time? I'm not saying you're suggesting it now, but I'm just curious at that time.
Oh, when you take a drug, it causes a special experience or a unique experience, and that certainly has an effect. But I don't know that I would say that that brought me to my path, but certainly added insight, uh, a new experience and maybe a perspective shift.
And so for other people, because I mean that's such a big thing now. I did ayahuasca before, and I've tried mushrooms. I think because I came to it after already having a serious meditation practice. My experience was a lot different than most people. I think most people can't really separate maybe their mind and what's being projected outwards from um, reality because I never really lost control per se. Um, or maybe that's not the right wording, but I I always felt like it was just more phenomenon. Maybe that has to do a lot with sitting because you kind of lose some interest in just seeing more colors or going to this world or that world. I've always had the perspective that there's kind of infinite amounts of worlds and infinite amount of experiences, and that we're trying to kind of move past that to something more transcendental. Um, but nonetheless, I can't really deny that there's, for pretty much a lot of people, don't really have much of a spiritual drive, and that for some reason, a lot of this stuff seems to open up a door for them. So I always kind of was like, if someone has, is into it or interested in it, and they've never done it before, I usually see it as a positive. How about you?
Case by case basis. Can't speak about endorsing any wide, use of anything. Um, I was speaking to some people earlier, uh, a group online, and they were asking me quite a bit about psychedelics. And I told them, look, you take a bunch of psychedelics, you're just as likely to become a little bit more insane as you are to become a little bit more enlightened. And just because you have an insightful experience on a drug, that doesn't mean that you can't keep it. It's still impermanent. So the process is what's most important. Getting involved in our way of being and our development, moment to moment. And maybe certain drugs are medicines. The Buddha certainly allowed even monks and people in general, Buddhists, to use medicines. So be careful with psychedelic substances; can be quite dangerous for many people. Even something like weed can really cause panic attacks and all kinds of negative things. So be very careful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the range of experiences. I find that also too. Sometimes people kind of come back from those experiences and they have a certain conviction about maybe the world or whatever, but it tends to always be very stuck because there's no way to kind of move forward with that because they didn't kind of since they didn't it wasn't something they kind of put effort in. It was something that kind of happened to them. Like in meditation, you're kind of like slowly there's a way to like progress little by little with your sitting or your understanding, your awareness might grow. But with that, you're kind of given this maybe, wider view of the world, and then you come back to your daily life and there's no way to really build on it or any like greater context to it, which is why I think for the most part it's great for opening things up, but not really that great for building a spiritual practice. Would you agree with that?
Uh, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's true for some people. I don't think it's always true for everyone, but it's possible that some people have that experience.
Hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. So I guess that's about all the questions I can think of for now. I definitely really happy that you're here in LA, and I know we're going to continue to, support each other, and
I support California.
yeah, support California and LA, which definitely needs it. And so, thank you very much, and just like to conclude this interview. And thank you to everyone else that's watching. And plan to, hopefully get one of these maybe every month to every 2 weeks. I think I want to put out an interview. And so this is just the beginning. So thank you for being my first guest, Bhante Varrapanyo.
Varrapanyo, and everyone who's watching there at home, don't forget to like and subscribe. I suppose for humble stature, but also you can search for Welcome to Monk Life on YouTube, and you can check out my YouTube channel. And I'm hosting live group meditations with community every day at 8 a.m. So welcome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much.